It is then that the matter of authorship re-enters the story. The king breaks with tradition by appointing 2 high priests in charge of religious affairs instead of 1.
It's not so strange to have 2 high priests. In Israel today there are 2 chief rabbis. The problem is when you have 2 chief priests instead of 1, each one spends most of his day sitting there thinking about how to get rid of the other one.
Not only are there 2 high priests, but towards the end of his reign, 2 of King David's sons are vying for the throne. It is uncertain which of them will be appointed the royal successor. A struggle for power ensues, and this embroils the high priests. Each one supports a different royal candidate. When David dies, it is Solomon who is chosen to wear the crown. Now the question is, will Solomon retain the services of both priests or return to the traditional practice of having only one man in charge of the nation's religious affairs? Not surprisingly, the priest who was loyal to Solomon during his candidacy is chosen. At the same time, the second priest is removed from power and banished from the kingdom. Thus, the priest retained by Solomon assumes an exclusive role. He and his assistants would soon take on new responsibilities as the king begins constructing the first great temple in Jerusalem. The deposed priest and his followers enviously watch from their place of banishment. They are now cut off from any possible future duties in the new temple.
They had no place in the royal kingdom in Jerusalem. And so a priest of that priestly house, we think, initiated the rebellion that ultimately led to the formation of the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. They wanted their own place where they could get to be the priests as well.
Thus, in 922 BCE, the 10 northerly tribes sever their allegiance to Jerusalem, and secession splinters the nation in 2, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. So 2 kingdoms born of a single nation oppose one another in an uneasy truce.
Each had its own king, each had its own traditions, its own sacred places of worship. At the same time, we're talking about a region that's the size of a large American county, so people were close to each other, people had relatives north and south, they both spoke the same language, and they both had the same old traditions of ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and events in Egypt with Moses, and events at Mount Sinai. And so it is thought that each kingdom produced its sacred text, or at least that one person living in each kingdom produced his version of the sacred text.
If this is so, is it possible that separate versions of the Bible were taking shape at the same time?
We think that the J material was first gathered together under King Solomon. It represents Solomon's attempt to gather up the stories of a people, to knit them together into a coherent narrative to tell the story about how the people of Israel came to be a people. And so it became a kind of national epic.
In answer to Solomon and his history of the people of Judah, the people of the northern kingdom of Israel now begin to amass their own collection of historical stories.
What they want to do is they want to add to this material that is more northern in orientation. And so they add material, and we think that this material is what we call E, because they tend to use the word Elohim for God. Now we have somewhat more sophisticated theological stories. But interestingly enough, we also have stories that tend to emphasize the significance of the second son. Many people who read Genesis notice, how come it's always the second son that comes out better? Isaac was after Ishmael, Jacob, Cain and Abel. I mean, all of these stories seem to emphasize the second son as the important one, or the preferred son. It could very well be that the northern kingdom, after their break, wanted to emphasize the second son because, in a sense, they were the second son. They were the breakaway kingdom. So they wanted to portray themselves as the preferred of the two.
Unlike the Bible's favored second son, however, the kingdom of Israel slips into the grip of paganism. As time passes, the people begin to worship Canaanite gods. They would suffer a long and difficult history under 19 kings, 8 of whom would die violently. Despite the warnings of prophets, moral decay and corruption continue to enslave the people. Then, 7.5 centuries before the birth of Christ, the prophecies come true. An invading Assyrian army sweeps in from the north and conquers Israel, forever scattering the 10 tribes to the winds, never to be seen nor heard from again. They become the so-called lost tribes of Israel.
Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel, and removed them from out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only. 2 Kings 17:18.
Together with the small tribe of Benjamin, the southern kingdom of Judah remains all that is left of the nation that had once settled the promised land. But an unremitting spiritual downfall has now gripped Judah too. Without any consolidated religious precepts, no laws, no sacred texts, paganism becomes rife throughout the land until King Josiah takes the throne. He tries to usher in change by outlawing idol worship and by a return to the holy covenant made with God at Mount Sinai.
Josiah was the young king who, as soon as he comes to the throne, decides that he wants to reform the religion of the people towards a more spiritual attachment to Yahweh, the national God. And so Josiah starts this campaign of, he even cleans up the temple, and he wants to re-employ the people in reconstructing the temple and making it more glorious and making it more spiritual. Well, along the way, they discover a book.
While cleaning out the buildings, the king's high priests find a scroll somewhere deep within the temple vaults.
The document that Hilkiah is understood to have read to Josiah on that date is thought by many of us to be the laws of the book of Deuteronomy. They are laws that say you should worship God in only one place, so Josiah destroys all the other places. These are laws that say that you should not have pagan worship, so he destroys idols and removes pagan worship from his country. He is the king who follows that law code. It's an extraordinary group of laws, from ritual matters of how to sacrifice to moral matters of how you should treat one another, that you should be just, that you shouldn't oppress a widow or an orphan, that you should take care of the poor. It's an extraordinary body of laws.
The laws reveal that the people had deviated from their faith. The author of the book was clearly writing from that perspective and was perhaps concerned about where society may be heading.
He writes in a very definite, observable style that you can see in Deuteronomy and see in 2 Kings, and you see it in one other place in the Bible. It's in the prose of the book of the prophet Jeremiah. And so I have suggested the likelihood that the same person is the author of the prose parts of the book of Jeremiah and the history that runs from Deuteronomy to 2 Kings.
The Bible tells us that the person responsible for writing down much of Jeremiah's work was his trusty scribe, Baruch.
Then took Jeremiah another scroll and gave it to Baruch the scribe, the son of Neriah. Jeremiah 36:32.